Earlier this year, the game Fortnite made a grave mistake. They added Darth Vader as an interactable character in the game. Cool. They gave him a lightsaber. Okay, awesome. They gave him full access to Google's Gemini AI. Uh-oh.
Wait, can you hear me?
Speak plainly, Nick A30. What information do you have?
Suddenly, Vader could understand what you were saying, he could reply in the style of Darth Vader, and even use voice replication technology to do so while sounding exactly like the character's original voice artist, James L. Jones. I find your lack of kill-to-death ratio
disturbing.
It was pretty convincingly done.
I'm family friendly.
Family friendly, even as you wield a Sith lightsaber.
Unfortunately, what Fortnite forgot is that when you drop an open-ended toy this powerful right into the hands of kids, they're not going to be using it for deep Star Wars lore discussions. Within literally hours, YouTube was flooded with clips of people successfully getting the AI to say,
Skibidi toilet.
And I'm looking for Dixie Normus.
This Dixie Normus, you say?
To literal racist and homophobic slurs, which is obviously very bad press for a game whose child safety measures millions of parents rely on. But since there was no major fallout from it, we'll let this one pass with a 2 out of 10 fail. Cannot say the same for the rest of these though. Honestly, good luck trying to sit through the most cringeworthy tech fails of all time. Because then we got Victorinox, the company most famous for the Swiss Army knife, but also traditional luxury watches. And this company, when the smartwatch first started taking off in 2016, clearly panicked and scrambled to come up with a way to stay relevant. The idea, forward thinking. The execution, we'll put it this way, I wish this had gone to a galaxy far, far away. This is the Inox Cyber Tool. It was an add-on for Victorinox's watches that effectively upgraded them into smartwatches. A have your cake and eat it too approach of being able to keep the already beautiful watch design, but with smart features like a stopwatch, like health tracking, like being able to get notifications from specific contacts you choose. But look at the thing, the only cyber tool here is someone who would actually buy a luxury watch like this, only then to pay $225 more to cover the whole thing up with this plastic calculator screen friendship bracelet abomination. Bear in mind, by the way, this display was not touchscreen, and it didn't even go all the way around. It's just this tiny sliver in the middle, which means it had to abbreviate words. Like your contacts would just become the first 4 letters of their name. So if you knew both a George and a Georgia, then flip a coin. As you can imagine, Cybertool was not a hit. It sold pretty close to 0 units, which is why it was impossible to actually get one so I could show you, and remains a rare blemish on Victorinox's well-established reputation for luxury. So you can't have your cake and eat it too. 3 out of 10 fail. So, do you know Keurig, the coffee pod machine maker? Well, most likely, that's all you know them for. But 2015 was when they tried to change that with Keurig Cold, a machine for brewing, well, cold, fizzy beverages. So basically a SodaStream. But unlike SodaStream, whose cola is Pepsi, Keurig managed to secure frickin' Coca-Cola as the drink that it could make. All topped off with a new mechanism that, unlike SodaStream, meant that it could carbonate your drinks without ever needing to even touch a CO2 canister. So why didn't this just destroy them? Well, I absolutely love me some Dr. Pepper. So let's get one of these Dr. Pepper pods, which, by the way, is absolutely enormous for one serving of a drink. Goes in there, and now we find out. Well, first off, this was insanely expensive. $370, or the equivalent of $500 now. The thing's absolutely colossal, demanding a large amount of your extremely valuable kitchen counter space. Oh yeah, and it's nearly as loud as a frickin' blender, which would have been fine if this was like a 5-second job, but it is still going. Still going, still going.
Much later.
Oh, hey, that doesn't look like Dr. Pepper.
Fight!
Oh, okay, then the cola comes after. I'll admit, there is something satisfying about seeing your own drink being made. The thing is, that took 90 seconds, or 80 seconds longer than just grabbing a can from the fridge. It is fizzy. It does taste somewhat like Dr. Pepper. It's got like a bit of gloopy syrupiness to it. Kind of like it's not quite been mixed properly. I'm actually curious, how old is this pod? Best by 2016. May have something to do with it. Fine, we can cut it some slack when it comes to flavor. But this is the thing that's gonna make you want to smack your head against a table. It's that having my drink made by my own Keurig machine, even if you take out the absolutely ridiculous cost of the unit itself, is still about 4 times more expensive than just going to a store and buying a can. One pod of this Dr. Pepper was priced at $1.75. And to really add insult to an already grievous injury, the only thing this thing does right, the method it had for carbonation, turned out to be dangerous. The pods themselves contain tiny beads that are saturated with CO2, which was then released into the drink when the beads interacted with moisture, which sounds cool, but what it actually meant is that these pods are volatile, to the point where Keurig themselves were advising you to handle them with care and to avoid opening them, as they could literally burn your mouth and stomach if consumed. So unsurprisingly, the cold was available for less than a year before Keurig decided to can the thing, while also having to offer full refunds and cutting 108 jobs at the factory where it was made. 4 out of 10 fail. Now, how do you one up a drink pod machine? Well, with a machine that 3D print your drinks. That is what Canna was trying to do with their Canna 1 molecular beverage printer. And this one flies particularly close to home because about 3 years ago, I was actually approached to become an investor in this product. So the idea is simple in theory. The vast majority of any beverage is water. The rest is just tiny, subtle differences in chemical makeup. Like these 3 lines here, they represent 1 red wine and 2 white wines. The drinks have completely different color, flavor, properties, but in a chromatography graph, where each one of these peaks is showing the presence of a molecule, you can actually see how similar the composition still is. And so this Canna 1 is the thing that's effectively providing those chemicals to build your drinks from the ground up on a molecular level, which, don't get me wrong, is extremely exciting. It would mean that you could change the levels of sugar, caffeine, alcohol, carbonation, even the nutrition of the drinks that you're making to suit your exact preferences. And so when I was approached, the company even asked me to design a few cocktails of my own that anyone who buys one of these would also be able to recreate on their end. Obviously, I was planning something passion fruit related. Plus also, this would almost completely kill waste. No more buying cans, no more bottles, no more semi-explosive pods that you have to keep throwing into landfill. And the pack of chemicals that you get could last you a month, with the company shipping you new ones as soon as you run out. The only thing you pay for is the drinks themselves, between 10 cents to $5 depending on what you order, which is a little bit of a weird idea, paying per drink from a product that you've already paid for, but hey, I take that over a monthly subscription fee. So after 3 years of development and even an actually working prototype to prove this wasn't science fiction, what killed it? Money problems. While the company did generate a healthy $30 million in funding, that still wasn't nearly enough to build a full manufacturing line, which creates a bit of a vicious cycle because then they couldn't fulfill their pre-orders, and if you can't fulfill your pre-orders, then your investors are going to start pulling out. Oh yeah, and they had to increase the price of the unit from $499 to $799 after the initial wave of pre-orders, all topped off with the COVID pandemic, creating even more havoc for trying to get any physical product made in at all decent time, and leading to the rise of anti-vax paranoia, which made the entire concept of chemically engineering your drinks start to sound more like a Bond villain plot to some people. So, before I could even get my hands on my unit to decide if I wanted to become an investor, the dream was dead. Without the money to make the thing, Canna had to very suddenly cancel all operations, lay off all of their employees, and sell their assets to another company. But the ripples are even greater when it's big companies who are screwing up. Like Apple, who in the year 2000 released their vision of the mainstream computer that every household should want to own, the Power Mac G4 Cube. God, wow, it's very small even by today's standards. I do love the fact that the wire is specifically designed to pivot. But yeah, the entire pitch here is that this computer packs a real punch for its size, while looking a lot cleaner than the average home PC that people would have had at the time. It really does feel like the precursor to the modern day Mac Studio. And critics actually applauded the thing initially. It's housed in acrylic glass, and it was such a unique looking computer that it was winning design awards left, right, and center upon release. But then things went downhill pretty fast. There's a reason that you don't see this fancy glass acrylic on Apple products anymore, because it was actually cracking at the corners, leading to some very entertaining headlines like, "Is it all it's cracked up to be?" It became enough of an uproar that Apple themselves had to respond. Except their response was that these were in fact intentional mold lines.
What?
But let's be honest, it doesn't really matter what it is if your product looks damaged. And if this thing wasn't winning on the design front, then what the hell was it winning at? Because at $1,799, this was far too expensive for most households. For pros, it was basically the same specs as the Power Mac G4 Tower, but with like half the ports. And then just look at this chonker of a power supply that, because it couldn't fit inside the body, had to be kept externally. It's also particularly ironic because 25% of this design is just air. So Apple thought this was going to be a breakout success. They actually sold less than 1/3 of their expectations, losing $90 million in projected sales, leading them to cut their losses and end the product entirely a year later. And what makes the Power Mac G4 Cube particularly noteworthy is this is the only time in history that Apple has ever come out themselves and called one of their own products.
It was a spectacular failure.
It's got to haunt Tim at night. 4 out of 10. But I am waiting for the day that they say the same thing about Apple Intelligence, because this is where things get a whole lot hairier. So, in the middle of 2024, the company announced Apple Intelligence. They called it AI for the rest of us, because everyone else had already been using ChatGPT for 2 years. They were late, but fine, at least it exists now. Then in September, they announced the iPhone 16s and spent the whole time talking about Apple Intelligence again, pretty much instead of actually announcing new phone features. Okay, so this really had better be something game-changing now. And then the feature launched. Or should I say, face planted. Siri was meant to be the big headline exciting upgrade with this flashy new animation, but I think it got worse. People found that it was slower, especially when it had to then reach out to ChatGPT for more complex answers. Some features that Apple had originally talked about just didn't make it, and the software that it all launched on, iOS 18, was like the buggiest piece of software Apple has ever made. I could probably summarize the sentiment with this here Reddit post, which people joked about in the comments, only then to realize that their own phones were just as screwed. What month was it last month?
It's Thursday, the 14th of August, 2025.
No, that's today.
It's Thursday, the 14th of August, 2025.
But what about last month? There was Cleanup, a new feature to remove things from your images, but compared to Samsung and Google's alternatives, it was really poor. There's this new AI Summaries feature, which bundles all your notifications together, which is already confusing because as soon as you have more than about 2, the summaries start to lose their actual meaning. But it was also summarizing wrong, so badly that the BBC actually made a complaint that their news was being misrepresented. Apple couldn't even come up with any good reasons to use their intelligence even in their official trailers, showing scenarios like someone who's done absolutely nothing at work all day and then uses Apple Intelligence to make his co-worker do it for him. Or this lady who forgot her partner's birthday, so uses Apple Intelligence to make a movie as his gift, as if the concept of a phone-made movie hasn't already been a feature for like a decade. Plus, isn't it just a little bit weird that all of these characters are not being great people? It makes it feel less like AI for the rest of us and more like AI for the worst of us. This is the tool for lying to your colleagues about having read an email that you haven't. And it's partly funny and cringe, especially when it's led to scenes like this, where Apple is actually just straight up getting told off by journalist Joanna Stern.
And so there is a real expectation that Siri should be as good, if not better, than the competition.
Oh, I think ultimately it should be. That's
but it's not right now.
That's certainly our mission. Yeah, but that's our mission.
But this Apple Intelligence fluff up has also put Apple in probably the most critical condition they've been in for the last 10 years. Because this makes the iPhone 16s that were predicated on Apple Intelligence probably the most redundant upgrade ever. Apple's internal team organization has apparently fallen apart over this AI. But most concerningly, when you fall behind in artificial intelligence, it is very hard to catch up. Apple has no data to train a massive, powerful AI model on like Google do. And so unless they strike a very big deal with someone, or they change their stance on the way that they use customers' data to help train their AI, it's hard to see how they're not just going to fall even further behind. 6 out of 10. This one's even harder to wrap your head around. Although granted, not that hard to wrap around your head. Magic Leap, the mixed reality company who started work on essentially the precursor to the Apple Vision Pro headset, but in 2016, managed to hit a valuation of not millions, but $4.5 billion before they'd even released a single product. For years, they'd been just trickling out teaser footage, promising some seriously powerful technology, like the ability for simulated objects to appear behind real objects in space, rather than all being superimposed over the camera feed. And then a later demo, which was supposedly completely undoctored, also showed virtual light sources reflecting off of real objects, which that's a tall order. You can see why people were excited about this. I mean, you look at the front, there's sensors everywhere, and look at this headband. That is how you do adjustability right. And so the hype train was, well, full. Google became a major backer, AT&T became an investor and sole partner too in 2018. And that same year, the Magic Leap 1 was released through them in the US. However, you know how no one talks about the Apple Vision Pro anymore? Because while it's hard to deny that the thing isn't a miracle piece of hardware, there's just nothing to do on it for an average user. Well, Magic Leap 1 was essentially that, but even more so. The hardware wasn't as much of a miracle, and the price certainly wasn't. This thing was $2,300, which is far too much, considering that the software experience looked like a Temu version of the Vision Pro, and that the field of view was far too narrow to be able to make the experiences feel immersive. So, unlike the millions of units that the company was expecting and gearing up to sell, how many were bought? 6,000 in the first 6 months. It fell so far short of expectations that Magic Leap was apparently losing tens of millions of dollars per month. 1,000 employees were laid off, and the CEO himself even stepped down. But if you haven't yet got cringe lines permanently baked into your face at this point, then it's time to spill the tea. On Tea. Tea is an app which has all the intentions of a knight in shining armor to enhance women's safety while dating, but with all the execution of a drunk man jousting on a unicycle. It's a women's only app where those women can talk about, can rate, and can share stories about men that they've dated to highlight any red flags for other women who might be about to. You can probably start to see where the questions come in. Because yes, the premise is to build an entire profile all about these guys, filled with intimate details like how they broke up, what their lesser traits are, anything about them that these women didn't like, without once asking for any kind of permission from the guys. It was creating, in some cases, as you can probably imagine, one of the most invasive forms of defamation, but just without the guys knowing that they'd been defamed. It does feel kind of dystopian that you could rock up to a first date knowing nothing about this person you're seeing, but she knows everything about you. Well, that did not seem to stop this app absolutely exploding in popularity in the US. It shot straight to #1 and hit around 6 million users according to the devs. But people on the internet, being understandably pissed, did what they always do. They took matters into their own hands. The Tea app was hacked, not once but twice. I mean, you can barely call it hacked because the security of the thing was so damn poor. And all information, including IDs and photos from over 70,000 women on the app, and even messages discussing abortions and cheating, were all completely exposed. The app is still going, but has just been hit with no less than 10 class action lawsuits from its somewhat understandably peeved users. But the funniest part of this saga is now, an entirely new app has been made in response. Tea on Her. It is literally the one-to-one male equivalent of Tea. And that has now just started leaking user data too. It's almost like there's a moral to the story. Number 4 is so bad. So Builder AI was one of the most promising British startups of all time. It was a company that promised consumers who had zero coding experience the ability to create their own apps. All you'd have to do was simply tell the AI agent Natasha what you wanted, and she would just pump out the finished software in a few weeks, or even days. And I don't think I need to explain why this was a popular idea. They worked with Virgin, the BBC, they even became officially backed by Microsoft. This company was absolutely soaring with a valuation of $1.5 billion. But it turns out Natasha, in what can only be described as the biggest catfish of the century, was actually over 700 programmers sitting behind a curtain in an office in India. This truly was the Flintstones car of artificial intelligence. Technically, there was some AI at work, picking out the best templates to start the app development from. But there's just something so unbelievably awkward about claiming to have developed super intelligence, only for it to actually be 700 underpaid guys locked in a dark room furiously programming in secret. And that might not actually be the worst part. Because after the company was already exposed, a probe was launched into their sales, finding out that Builder AI had actually been claiming to be selling 4 times what they really were, and that this company already existed before as Engineer AI and had pulled the exact same trick there too. So investors obviously started dropping out like flies wanting their money back, and without the money, Builder pretty quickly ran dry and declared bankruptcy, and then was investigated by the authorities in both the UK and the US. 7 out of 10. And if they want some financial advice, I've got 700 guys in a closet called Amy they can talk to. How's this for cringe? A device originally intended for child tracking that then pivoted to becoming a games console when the company realized that no one wanted a child tracker, whose best-selling game ended up being Sticky Balls. This is the Gizmondo, and it's honestly one of the most legendary cock-ups of all time. So the year was 2005, the year of the Titan Nintendo DS, but Swedish company Tiger Telematics thought that they could do better. God, it still looks like a child tracker. Okay, games, movies, music, messaging, camera. So this is a 0.3 megapixel VGA sensor. It's actually not as bad as that makes it sound. Oh, and then GPS, which is clearly a remnant of the child tracker this thing was originally meant to be. And if you're thinking these sound more like phone features, you'd be right. The thing also has cellular connectivity, allowing you to browse the web and send SMS texts with pictures, with even music and movies. And then of course, we gotta try a game. I guess you could say it's kind of like Mario Kart, if, you know, your kart was one wheel. At least it runs at 60 FPS, that much I'll give it. How many games? 8 in total, which is already red flag number 1, considering the thing was $230. And that $230, by the way, was for the ad-supported tier of this console, which meant that companies were able to use your location, thanks to the GPS chip inside, and then target ads to you as you walked near their stores. And so if you then didn't want these companies invasively stalking your children, the thing was $400. Pony up, mum. And the marketing was absolutely ridiculous. Millions were spent on stunts like a celebrity party in one of London's top hotels. And then Gizmondo's CEO, Stefan Eriksson, even taking part in the famous 24 Hours of Le Mans race. Were they expecting either of these to be resonating with children? Just to make things worse, they then delayed the US release and announced a widescreen version of the thing before that release, which, I mean, what a fantastic way to make everyone that's already pre-ordered your normal console hate you. But here is where it just gets comical. Reports then started coming out in Swedish newspapers that Stefan Eriksson used to be the leader of a Swedish mafia group.
Whoa, 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 whoa. Whoa.
Making the whole Le Mans race thing a relatively normal part of his personality by comparison. You know, we'd like to give some video game CEOs silly nicknames and imagine they're kind of mythological figures, like Reggie, the Reginator Fils-Ami. But this is real. Eriksson was literally known as Fat Steve and the banker in the criminal underworld. You can't make this stuff up. He actually served time in prison for car thefts and cocaine and arms deals, which is probably enough for anyone to rethink the GPS tracking ad-supported tier of the console. And it starts to make sense why the Nintendo DS sold 150 million units, Sony's PSP sold 80 million units, and this sold just 25,000, which put the company near $400 million in debt. Gizmondo Europe was liquidated in 2006, and almost like a final kill from the grave, the liquidators couldn't explain where half the money had gone. It had just disappeared without any documentation. But given the literal mafia involvement in the product, I think we have a pretty good idea where it went. 8 out of 10 fail. And speaking of organized crime, this one's actually kind of exciting, because you may remember me doing an unboxing for this little guy about 5 years ago, the Escobar Fold 2. And then not too long after, the Escobar Gold 11 Pro. Essentially, Escobar Inc., the company responsible for managing the money of notorious drug lord Pablo Escobar, started selling these strange gold-covered phones at ridiculously low prices. The Fold 2 that I was sent cost $399, like a literal fraction of the asking price for any self-respecting foldable device at the time. And they were making some wild claims, like the fact that the phone was indestructible and that they were better than Samsung and that they were intending to sue Apple for cheating people by selling worthless phones. Only for the Escobar devices to arrive in reviewers' hands and for us to realize that in fact, Of course, these were just Samsung phones with stickers on them and iPhones with a gold-colored backplate. But it gets a whole lot more devious because the reviewers are the only ones who received anything. All they sent to the other customers was a couple of bits of paper, intended solely to establish a mailing record, so that if anyone applied for a refund, they could tell the payment processors that the product had arrived and kept the money, which is just absolutely cartoonish, mustache-twirling villainy. Anyway, the reason that we're talking about this now is the guy behind the entire operation, Olof Gustafsson, has now been caught and has been charged with, get this, 1 count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud and mail fraud, 9 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of mail fraud, 1 count of conspiracy to engage in money laundering, 41 counts of actually engaging in money laundering, 35 counts of international money laundering, and 25 counts of engaging in monetary transactions in property derived from specified unlawful activity. That has got to be one of the worst rap sheets in history. 9 out of 10. And because of it, he now faces up to 20 years in federal prison for each fraud charge, and up to 10 years for each laundering count. And so, even though he hasn't pleaded guilty to everything, it is quite easily a life sentence, plus up to $1.3 million in fines, which, knowing him, he will probably try to pay with strips of kitchen roll with dollar stickers on either side. It's not very often that we have R&B singers appearing on this series. But then again, it's not very often that you get R&B singers trying to build a city. Yes, we're talking about Akon, who in 2018 announced that he wanted to build a real-life Wakanda in Senegal, Africa. A hyper-futuristic city based on modern technologies. Sounds pretty cool, right? And credit where credit's due, these plans do look like something straight out of a movie. If only in a completely ludicrous, imaginary SpaceX Mars colony kind of way. But still, it was meant to be self-powered and environmentally friendly. It would have luxury condos, a beachfront resort, office parks, a university, and a hospital, which he wanted to all be an hour flight, maybe 2, from anywhere in Africa. Which you'll know is quite the claim, if you've at all tried navigating the continent recently. But there was reason to take him seriously. Akon has delivered before. Like a few years prior, he did this whole Akon Lighting Africa campaign, installing streetlights and household solar systems and actually reaching 28.8 million people, which is probably why when it came to talking about Akon City, he managed to accrue astounding levels of funding. They got to a point where they had $4 billion worth of investors' money to play with. But this is Akon City. The skeleton of the visitor center is the entirety of what has been built 8 years after that announcement. Because the modern technologies that this city was supposed to be based on were the blockchain and Akon's own cryptocurrency. Close your ears. Acoin. It didn't help that the buildings he wanted to make were very difficult to construct. The fact that they had so much metal and massive windows which would effectively turn them into greenhouses in the Senegalese sun, and that even if they got around all of that, just the fact that they looked like, well, human parts. But I would say the crux of it was Acoin absolutely collapsing. It lost 99% of its value, because why wouldn't it? It didn't even mean anything. So like, what better way to kill a new economy before it's even started than for its currency to become worthless? It got to the point where the Senegalese government themselves had to step in and scrap the project entirely, leaving behind just a single half-built hut, a dead crypto coin, and an abandoned, very phallic vision of the future. 9 out of 10. What if there was a way to know something was a risky endeavor before taking it on? What if there was an AI-powered scam defense system that watches everything from your text to your emails to your WhatsApp to your calls and just flags the dodgy stuff before you end up on a tech fails video because you accidentally wired half your savings to the Escobars? Well, that is literally what Bitdefender's Scam Copilot is designed for. Let's say someone texts you a link saying your bank account is frozen. Copilot is the one making sure that it's not someone actually trying to steal your details. Someone calls from Microsoft support and asks to remotely take control of your PC. Copilot's there. It's making sure that they should be doing that. It's even got features like scam outbreak alerts. So if a new congratulations you've won an iPad wave is hitting your area, Bitdefender can tell you before your grandma accepts it. And with my special link below, you can get 90 days of Bitdefender's premium security completely free.